I always get camels. That's the first one. People always ask about camels. I don't really know why. It's usually something along the lines of, do you guys have cars where you're from, or do you just take camels everywhere? And I mean, it sounds relatively comical at this point. It gets annoying after a while. But I always usually respond sarcastically, I guess, is my best way, because I try to like kind of bring forth to people how ridiculous that question really sounds if you think about it in retrospect. But that's usually my response is, yeah, of course, take camels everywhere. Mine's pink, but when it's out of commission, I take the flying carpet. I always respond like very sarcastically, and people kind of get the point. But I think that's the one I get most often, definitely camels. I mentioned earlier True Lies. That one was actually big. I do remember that one as a young child, and seeing them, and particularly Palestinians in that movie, and saying, hey, like I'm one of those people, and being a little bit confused because I never saw myself or anybody, any member of my family, anybody I ever knew, the way that Palestinians were portrayed in that film. And so as a 10-year-old, you don't really understand, you don't really know, but I just remember being particularly confused, like why is this image being put out of people that I know? I mean, I know Palestinians, I am a Palestinian. I've never met anybody like this, so why am I on TV looking like this? It was definitely confusing, was I think the best way to put it as a young child. Was in 5th grade at the time, so I just remember after that day, it just becoming very, very acceptable for people to like make, I guess, like implications that my family was involved in terrorism because I was the only Arab from the community that I came from. So I remember the next day, or very, very shortly after the September 11th attacks happened, waiting in line for lunch, like wrapping around the corner of the lunchroom, and the kid said next to me, goes, Serena, is your dad okay? And I go, my dad's at work. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, yeah, he wasn't on that plane or anything, was he? And I remember not really even understanding that, because I thought it was just so ridiculous, just being like, why would my dad be on that plane? My dad goes to work, he makes seat belts, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And just being particularly confused, but then eventually like understanding that that was way more offensive than I realized it was when I was 9. That, and actually I had that day, the day of the attacks themselves, I had an incident with one of my teachers. Again, I'm in 5th grade, and we start watching the news. They put the TV on, and we see the towers, and they're burning. And I remember sitting there in the class, having maybe a few days earlier given a presentation on culture. It was Culture Week in Lake Orion. And I did one on Arab culture and Palestinian culture maybe just a few days before the attacks happened. And my teacher getting up while we're watching the towers burn as 9 and 10-year-olds, and she says something along the lines of, there's definitely those Arabs, they're behind this. And at this point, that was completely speculative. Nobody had any idea what was going on. So just like hearing those words come out of her mouth, and me having given a presentation about how I'm Arab like 2 days before, I could feel everybody's eyes on me in that room. And I remember picking up my Harry Potter book and putting it in front of my face and just pretending to read, because I didn't want people to look at me, and I didn't want to have to see them look at me. It was really frustrating, and it was scary. And I went home, and I remember telling my parents about it and just being like, I'm not mad. It just hurt me a little bit. I was sad by it, and I felt like my peers looked at me a little bit differently after that day, and I didn't appreciate it because I didn't feel different.